Prime Minister, welcome to the program.
Good morning, David.
Now, Iraq says these strikes are disastrous for both security and stability in the region. Do you think they're appropriate?
We support the actions of the United States. These are proportionate. These are retaliatory for the actions of basically Iran-backed organisations, and they are not an escalation. So we think that the United States has got it right. It's important that given the attacks that have occurred by groups that are backed by Iran, that there be a response, and there has been.
Where is this heading though? Strikes, counter-strikes, it is greater US involvement. Donald Trump reckons we're on the brink of World War III. What do you think?
I don't think that's right. I think that the United States has played a responsible role in the region. You can't have the sort of attacks that we've seen and see no response, whether it be the actions of the Houthis in targeting our trade, or whether it be the attacks that occurred on Americans in Jordan. So you have seen a response. We want to see the area settle down. We're working with our allies to play a role there.
Are you prepared to commit any more Australian resources? We only have, I think, 16 personnel committed to the combined maritime forces there.
Well, we haven't been asked for any further support.
If you are?
Well, our concentration is on the Indo-Pacific. That's something that the United States and our allies certainly understand.
What about longer term? We now have the British government talking about possibly recognising a Palestinian state after a ceasefire in Gaza, without necessarily waiting for years of negotiations over the details. The US also says it's in talks about the establishment of a Palestinian state. Benjamin Netanyahu, we know, is flatly opposed. Can I ask, would you be willing to recognise a Palestinian state without the approval of Israel?
Well, Australia supports a two-state solution. We support the right of Israel to exist within safe and secure borders, but we also support justice for Palestinians, and we support a political solution in the region. And it's important that the international community play a role. I issued a statement with the Prime Minister of Canada and the Prime Minister of New Zealand that called for this, that called for the release of hostages, that called for a humanitarian ceasefire, that called for humanitarian support to the people of Gaza, but also, of course, recognise the right of Israel to defend itself. But it is important that we look to, arising out of this crisis, what is the long-term solution? And quite clearly, that requires us, the international community, have had support for a long period of time for that two-state solution to be advanced.
Does it need Israel's support, though?
Well, I think it needs, obviously, a two-state solution. One of those states is Israel.
So it would have to be on board.
Israel has an interest in security. Quite clearly, if you're talking about the distance between Bethlehem and Jerusalem, for people who have travelled to the region, it's like the difference between where we are now and Queanbeyan. The idea that you can have security with the tension in the region, we need to de-escalate. Part of that might mean, for example, any existence of a Palestinian state would be one which was a demilitarised state as well. So those are the sort of issues that need to be on the table. The United States, I know, is looking at these issues, as is the United Kingdom, and Australia, and certainly my government, has a position of support for two states, and indeed the resolution that was carried by the House of Representatives indicated that as well.
More immediately, can I ask you about funding for UNRWA, the UN agency that delivers aid in Gaza? Australia's amongst a group of nations that suspended funding after the allegations 12 of the UNRWA staff were involved in the Hamas attack on Israel. Where is this at? Are you still worried there are some links between UNRWA staff and Hamas?
Well, we're examining it along with other like-minded countries such as Canada, the United Kingdom and the United States. And we want that to be resolved. The issue here is, one, it's a deep concern that this occurred, that there was some involvement, and those allegations need to be fully examined to ensure that every single dollar of aid is going to just that.
So right now you're not
going to aid.
You're not convinced that there are no links?
Well, what we're doing is going through those processes along with our like-minded allies, but all of us want to see the support for kids in Gaza can't be in a situation whereby people are literally starving, and the only organisation that can provide that support there is UNRWA. UNRWA are providing shelter for literally hundreds of thousands of people there. So it's an organisation that has had bipartisan support. It's been funded by Australia for a long period of time and has been funded by our like-minded allies as well. But we want to make sure that the organisation has every single dollar going to the purpose for which it's given.
Okay, your notes are about to pop out of your pocket there, PM. I hate you to leave confidential information on the desk here at Insiders. Let's turn to the tax debate now. When will you make the legislation available for the opposition, the Greens, for everyone to see the detail of these tax changes?
We'll make the legislation available later today. It will be available for all to see so that it can be considered by the various party rooms over the next couple of days.
The Shadow Cabinet's meeting tomorrow, so you're giving them the opportunity to see the detail before that?
We certainly are. The detail's pretty clear, by the way, and we released all the Treasury documents when I spoke at the National Press Club 10 days ago. So they've had that detail out there, but we'll release the actual legislation later today. It will be introduced into the Parliament on Tuesday by the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers.
When does it need to be passed? I assume making it available today is part of a desire to have this dealt with quickly. Employers and the tax office need to know what the rules will be for July 1.
We want it to be passed as soon as possible, and certainly it needs to be passed during this existing session so as to provide that easy transition for employers, for the tax office, for others as well.
So before the budget it needs to be passed?
We want it passed during this session, which finishes up before Easter, but the sooner the better. We'll be able to give consideration in the House of Representatives over the next 2 weeks, and then the Senate will return after just a 1-week break and be able to consider the legislation. But this is legislation which people will see, which will give every taxpayer a tax cut, and it should receive the support of every parliamentarian.
Well, you've obviously been selling this line that every taxpayer gets something. 84% of taxpayers will get more than they would have originally. Here's what I still don't understand. If it is fairer, better for Middle Australia, why didn't you take this package to the election?
Well, circumstances have changed, and what we've done is respond to the changed economic circumstances. You'd be aware, David, that I don't think you or any other commentator was saying that there would be 13 interest rate increases between, they started, of course, under the Morrison government, but continued that inflationary pressure.
Perhaps not that number of interest rate rises, but you yourself were saying before the election, this was from your campaign launch speech, this is the worst inflation rate in 2 decades. You said families are struggling, worried about the future. Why didn't you want to give them more at the time?
What has occurred since the election is that cost of living pressures have remained for a period, for a number of reasons.
I'm talking about during the election campaign, though, when you knew there was skyrocketing inflation. Why were you so wedded to the higher end tax cuts?
During the election campaign, David, you will recall that the former governor now of the Reserve Bank had said prior to that interest rate increase that interest rates would stay at the level, 0.1%, until 2024.
And then he started increasing them.
Until now. Exactly.
Then he started increasing them.
Exactly. So the outlook was very different for global inflation. We didn't have a view that the Russian invasion of Ukraine and that war would be ongoing. There wasn't the Middle East conflict. There are a range of measures that have meant that global inflationary pressure has been a major issue, and that's had an impact.
No doubt, but in the campaign,
on prices.
I mean, let's be honest. You backed these tax cuts for political reasons, didn't you? You never really liked them.
Well, what we did, David, in the Parliament in 2019 is two things. One, we tried to amend out the stage 3 tax cuts. We weren't successful. We failed by just one vote. When that occurred, we thought that we weren't prepared to stand in the way of all of the tax cuts, but we said at the time that it was a triumph of hope over experience for any government to say they knew what the economy would look like in 5 years' time.
You pledged to keep them. Prime Minister...
And we've changed it. I've been really upfront, David.
You have. That's
one of the things that I have done is to go to the National Press Club and say, we have changed our position. Why have we done that? Because we've listened to people, and particularly low and middle income Australians are under pressure, under financial pressure. And what you can't do, what I can't do as Prime Minister of Australia, is to wring my hands and say, if only there was something I could do about it. Now, what we needed to do was to look at what is the best way we can take pressure off cost of living without putting pressure on inflation. These measures, this legislation is good for middle Australia, but it's also good by not leaving people behind, by giving everyone a tax cut. But it's also good for the economy, David, because it will increase labour supply by some 900,000 hours, which will make a significant difference as well for those long-term issues of labour supply that are also having an inflationary pressure.
But Prime Minister, is your word still your bond?
What we've done, David, is be really upfront. I went along to the National Press Club.
No, we heard that, but I'm asking, is your word still your bond?
David, circumstances changed over 5 years. And I certainly, when we said what we did, we were very clear about that. This wasn't some...
But I'm asking whether your word is still your bond. Are you going to be...
David, I'm an honest person.
But will you be less categorical in promises?
I'm an honest person, and I am upfront. And what I have done here is be very, very clear. And I've listened to people who are all saying to me, well, what are you doing about cost of living? What are the measures that you can put in place?
A lot of people are also saying, what are you doing on negative gearing? Are existing negative gearing rules, in your view, fair?
Well, they make a difference for people. They've been there for a long period of time. There's a whole lot of analysis that says that they encourage investment in housing. And the key when it comes to housing is housing supply. So in housing supply, what we've done, the only tax measure that we've had when it comes to housing is a supportive measure to support build to rent. Now that will result in increased supply of between 150 and 250,000 dwellings.
But the negative gearing rules are fair at the moment.
Well, they're there, David, to be used to...
You're the Prime Minister, as you've said, you can't...
Well, they're there to encourage investment.
And they're fair?
David. Well, they're not an equity measure, they're a supply measure. They're not about equity. Equity is through other measures in the tax system as well.
Are they responsible? Are they appropriate? Are you supportive of the current rules?
Well, we're supportive of the current rules. We have not considered changes to them. And we have, when we look at housing supply, we've had a whole range of measures, whether it be in social housing through the Social Housing Accelerator, whether it be encouraging of private housing as well, whether it be the work that we've done through states and territories about planning measures with our housing bonus to encourage states and territories to increase that supply. That's the key that we need.
What about trusts? They are used as a way of minimising tax. Are you comfortable with the existing rules on family trusts?
We're comfortable with all of the existing systems, David. What we've done is target cost of living. And the big measure that we can do on cost of living is that we had this $106 billion pool there. And what we've done is to have a sensible change that we're advancing. And it will be up to the Parliament. They will have to decide whether our plan is better than the existing plan put in place under Scott Morrison. And that's what members and senators will have to weigh up. That's something we're prepared to advocate for and campaign for, because that is what will make a difference. A difference where everyone will get a tax cut right up and down the income scale. What we're doing here is reducing that first rate from 19 to 16, so everyone gets a tax cut. That flows through beyond $45,000. Then we're increasing the rate from 120 to 135 and increasing the top rate, David. And I'll make this point. We're increasing the top rate from 180 to 190. That is the first increase since 2008. And that contrasts with when Peter Dutton was part of the Abbott government that introduced, without any notice before the election, the levy, so-called deficit levy, on those high-income earners without any notice at all. Well, at the same time as he personally tried to introduce a GP tax on going to the doctor.
Both sides are probably responsible for this. We rely increasingly on income tax in Australia, and this chart from the intergenerational report last year really underscores the point. It's workers who are going to be shouldering more and more of the tax burden to pay for government services over the years and the decades ahead. Income tax as a proportion of GDP is going up and up. The changes you're making to stage 3, in fact, involve even more bracket creep to the tune of an extra $28 billion over the decade. Don't we need to rely less on income tax?
Well, what we're focused on, David, is how we can make changes that make a difference right now. That is the focus of the government. On equity, we've had a range of other measures as well. And I'll tell you another area that has made a significant difference to the fight against inflation. That's producing the first budget surplus in 15 years. So responsible fiscal policy, working with monetary policy, dealing with supply chain issues through fee-free TAFE and other measures that we've put in place, fixing the migration system so it helps with labour supply,
but on income tax,
as well as...
Do we need to rely less on income and more on taxing wealth and assets?
Well, David, we have a tax system which is there. We have put forward these concrete changes, and what I'm doing is arguing for these changes. I know that...
But longer term, do we need to tax assets and wealth more?
Well, those academic debates will take place, David. What I'm interested in is what's real.
You're the PM.
And what I'm interested in is what's real and what's before the Parliament now. And I know, as Prime Minister, I have a responsibility to make a difference. This change was not easy. It was not an easy decision, but it was the right decision, done at the right time for the right reasons.
So the tax cuts flow from July 1. Inflation's coming down faster than expected. Economists reckon we might see some interest rate cuts before the end of the year.
Not by accident, David.
Well, it's got...
Inflation's coming down because of the responsible policies that my government has put in place. And it contrasts with... You spoke about what happened before the last election. Yes, inflation peaked in the March 2022 quarter before we came to office at 2.1%. And the response of the former government under Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg and Peter Dutton, all sitting there as part of the ERC, was to pour money into the economy, which made inflation worse. We've been dealing with
the annual rate peaked a little later than the election. But the point I was going to get to is if things are heading in the right direction, we see some interest rate cuts by the end of the year. There's a bit of speculation, including from Phil Curry, who's over on the couch there, that you might be tempted to call an election before the end of the year. What's your thinking?
I think 3-year terms are too short. I've supported 4-year terms, which is what states and territories have right around the country. I know there's been a referendum to try to change that was not successful.
So no election this year?
But look, I'm looking at 2025 in the normal pattern of things. We'll make a decision as Prime Minister in consultation, but I think that governments, as a general rule, should serve the full term, and that means an election in 2025.
Prime Minister, thanks for joining our first show of the year.
Thanks very much, David.